In recent years, my interest in Star Wars has been at an all-time low. After Disney's acquisition, the newest movies have done nothing but tarnish the nostalgia I had growing up in my formative years. Meanwhile, the TV shows have failed in converting me into a consistent Disney Plus subscriber. So instead of forking over my cash, I sit and watch as one of my favorite franchises as a kid gets milked like a cash cow. Rey, Finn, Kylo Ren, The Mandalorian, and even the pandering Solo film and Obi-Wan TV series just rang hollow to me. It was all noise that I had blocked out. I was unable to overcome this suffocating feeling that a great IP was being stretched as thin as possible to extract dollars from wallets. Meanwhile, in the gaming world, Star Wars games of the last decade have pretty much come and gone. Battlefront and its sequel were a disgrace when compared to the PS2 classic.
Obi-Wan Kenobi here. I've engaged the enemy. What a wretched gathering of scum and villainy.
And other games like Squadrons, while seemingly okay, never really had my attention. My Star Wars apathy was just too high, and these games couldn't break through. But there was one game that did. Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order. This 2019 EA game showed a lot of promise at release. When converting the razzle-dazzle of lightsaber fights and the undefined raw power of the Force into game mechanics, you're gonna turn some heads. And then you house those mechanics in a Souls-like template while telling a unique story that takes place during one of the most underexplored eras in the franchise's timeline? Okay, now we're talking. Sign me up, you got my attention. And so, despite the numerous bugs and presentational failures, Fallen Order represented a rare, single-player win for EA. It was a solid but flawed game in a year that didn't feature a whole lot of exciting releases. A potential sequel held promise, and now 4 years later, here we are. Star Wars Jedi Survivor. Not to front-load my thoughts on the subject, but I want to be clear that I loved this game. I really enjoyed it, and I want to set that as the tone for this video because I am going to be a bit harsh on it. The reason I loved it is because Jedi Survivor managed to reach deep down past all the layers of shoulder-shrugging apathy and staleness that I felt and pull out that nostalgia and glee that I once felt. Going beyond the good times I had with Fallen Order, Survivor delivers potentially the best Star Wars game of all time by improving on the original in mostly every way. You know, so long as you aren't playing on the unpatched PC port of the game. As for me, playing on PlayStation 5, this game succeeds by taking everything from the first game and expanding on it. A better story, more combat options, more enemy variety, bigger and better levels, more platforming mechanics, plenty of customization, and more. With that being said, there are some caveats, big ones even, that hold this game back, and I won't be holding back on them as we go. However, on the whole, Jedi Survivor feels like a slam dunk Star Wars story that truly understood and respected the IP instead of milking it dry for every dollar and dime it could. And that alone is a reason to celebrate. At times, Survivor feels like such a massive game, and in many ways, it is. But let's start by establishing its approach to level design before taking a look at how we explore and navigate those environments. There's 6 planets. 4 are extremely linear levels with set paths and a few nooks and crannies to uncover goodies in. The other 2 are more open world-ish. One in particular feels like a vast open map with linear levels branching off of it. These 2 planets, Jedha and Kobo, that being the bigger one, are the 2 you'll spend most of your time on, while the other 4 feel like mission-specific locations. Go through them once, and you'll see most of it, outside of the few Metroidvania-like obstacles blocking optional reward corridors. You know, do some platforming, kill some stormtroopers, unlock the shortcuts, watch a cutscene, and maybe defeat a boss before heading back to the big boy planets. If you've played Jedi Fallen Order, this approach to design will feel immediately familiar. These straight-through levels exist on Jedha and Kobo as well, like the remains of the Lucrehulk. That comes to mind as being a great one. But Kobo itself is so much more, and this is how the game improves on the original in level design. The map of this planet is humongous, constantly getting bigger as you continue to play. Zones that initially seemed inaccessible on the map turn into meaty, hour-long conquests, dipped in thick Star Wars atmosphere, providing cohesive but varied landscapes to this arid planet. It reminded me of Elden Ring. Mind you, Kobo is no lands between, but that same feeling of surprise over an ever-expanding map is felt as Cal puts one foot in front of the other. 3 of my hours were spent on Kobo just adventuring, following my map and seeing what was available, hiking down the paths I could while marking those that required more skills. It just sucked me into the world. I couldn't fathom leaving a stone unturned, and when the credits rolled, I knew I still had a lot to discover here. I mean, look at this map, it's gigantic. Even Jedha, the next biggest planet, paled in comparison to its size. Swapping out arid landscape for true desert brought not only a color palette swap, but also another chance to explore, and explore I did. While not quite as rewarding, owed to having less to find, Jedha still stood out as a place of discovery. Together, these two planets reminded me of that open section in The Last of Us Part 2, where you could just ride around piecing together the history of this pocket of the Pacific Northwest. While other levels remained linear, that one stood out. Kobo is that derelict portion of Seattle on a much larger scale, while Coruscant, Novigrad, and the other smaller levels felt like what you might see in Seattle Day 2. Impressive, that's the best way to describe these rancors of a planet. Massive and full of rewarded adventure. But how does the game reward exploration? Well, as most successful games do nowadays, intrinsically and extrinsically. It's been fascinating over the last decade watching as games attempt to bring more to movement. The sprawling Hyrule fields in Ocarina of Time were impressive to ride across in the day, but just going forward in a straight line just doesn't cut it in 2023. Games nowadays look to do more by incorporating reaction time, decision making, and puzzle solving directly into traversal. Jedi Survivor is the latest to accomplish this intrinsically rewarding approach to design. Very rarely will you be walking in a straight line for long in this game, and when you are, you're probably riding a funky alien camel. More likely is you'll be dashing into a wall run where you'll leap and force pull a swing rope before doing a bit of climbing to reach your destination. And when that's done, then do it again. Why not? It feels super smooth. It takes your simple inputs and transforms them into satisfaction by delivering quality animations that make you feel like you just barely pulled off that sick-looking move. It never ever gets tiresome, even as the game adds new additions on top of the returning ones. A grapple hook never hurts, and these balloons that redirect your trajectory delight as well, while opening up opportunities for hidden rewards on alcoves and balconies. It's an excellent movement system that provides downtime from combat without quite letting you shut off your brain. Well done. That intrinsic satisfaction is matched by the extrinsic items you'll pick up as you poke around in the crevices of natural terrain and the man-made pockets of abandoned factories. Survivor often doles out breadcrumbs of treats, getting you to stop to perform a BD1 scan, grab a collectible or upgrade, or hear the remains of a distant echo. Not all of these are tangible rewards that excite. Many unlock more of the lore and background for the story, but those upgrades, those are peak finds. Increasing your force meter, health, or rewarding a skill point feels incredible immediately, like someone's just given you a piece of candy for free. Arguably, just as important are the customization items you can find. Finally, Cal can have a beard. As a fellow bearded boy, this look just called out to me. The story tells a deeper and darker story about Cal than Fallen Order did, and for some reason, a beard just seems to fit that better. I can't explain it. So yes, exploration is rewarded heavily. Moving around the environment is enjoyable in its own right, especially with the expanded repertoire of moves, and you're never too far away from something to scan or a way to enhance your Jedi skill set. It's great, and it pushes you to continue exploring, even worlds as big as Kobo. You're inspired to explore it not because a quest marker tells you to go somewhere, but simply because of the pleasure derived from playing the game. And that's good. What of quest design though? What exactly is there to do when you're not working towards the completion of the main story or just gallivanting about? Well, not a lot, but there is some things of note. The first that comes to mind is expanding the Pylon Saloon. This Koboian dive bar is owned by Grease, but it's up to you to bring out its full potential. This means scouting for helpful NPCs who might improve the offerings, like a gardener to tend your deep space flora, or new opponents to play holo tactics against, and just a bit more. The saloon isn't quite a customizable space like you might find in Animal Crossing or Fallout 4, but it does contain ways to bring this bar to life. You'll come back here a lot, and seeing faces, new and old, is a momentary delight. In a way, it becomes Cal's new home as you play. Not a ton to do, but it's home. It goes far in delivering its own version of the Mos Eisley Cantina, one where you can chat with its denizens at your leisure, and that's just plain cool. Besides this, there's two types of side activities to tackle: rumors and bounties. Rumors are simple side quests, and there aren't a whole lot of them. Discovery through exploration remains king of optional content in this game, so don't expect much from these simple side stories. The handful that I found are completed quickly, and didn't stand out quite as much as finding a Rancor just hiding in a random cave. Bounties are more structured and plentiful, but not all that much better, and that's owed to their cumbersome nature. Bounties can be found on different planets, but accepting and finishing ones are all done at the saloon, meaning each time you finish one, you have to go back to turn in and accept a new one. It seemed this could have been automated in the menus because as it is now, it wastes a ton of the player's time. You're constantly flying back to Kobo, only to leave again. Plus, there's still a shop associated with the bounty hunter, so players could still return to her if interacting with her meant that much to the developers. There's a ton of these shops around the galaxy, by the way, where you can swap collectibles for customization options for Cal, BD1, your lightsaber, and more. But because traveling to these stores meant having to return to the Mantis, fly to that planet, and make my way to the shop, it just never felt worth doing. The same problem plagues bounties. After completing 6 or 7, I got tired of the back and forth. This was doubly true after the last bounty I did saw me getting trapped in an area, unable to find a way out, and having to die to respawn back at a fast travel point. I wasn't recording at the time, but it was the first one on Jedi. So overall, the point here is that level design is great, but the structured side content really can't compete with the joy of free roaming. And when you aren't doing all that, you'll probably have your lightsaber out. Combat in Survivor. Did they improve it over Fallen Order? Or at least from what I remember from it? Well, in some ways yes, and others no. Let's see the setup first. Back and forth melee action where the player balances offensive moves like strikes and parries with defensive maneuvers like blocks and dodges. The best fights in the game are the ones that emphasize that back and forth. That's right, just like in the movies, the one-on-one duels are the best. Starting a combat discussion with bosses is strange, but it represents the peak of dueling here. That's because it allows you to experience that flow state through growth and repetition. If things get too tough, you can learn animations and movesets through experience, and once you've got it down, it's like a symphony of buzzes and zaps as strikes connect. The best fights in Survivor remind you of Sekiro because just one solo adversary can challenge you in ways that waves of foes cannot. Without the accompanying overwhelming noise, you're free to exchange blows, and when you best your opponent, you feel like you've earned it through practice, timing, and patience. It's fantastic. This remains true regardless of how you choose to play. Carried over from Fallen Order, Cal can wield a single lightsaber, dual lightsabers, or a double-bladed variant. However, here in Survivor, two new stances have been added, Blaster and Crossguard. Blaster puts a gun in your left hand, adding a ranged element to attack. You can use this for chip damage or to overwhelm a melee user's poise bar. Meanwhile, Crossguard is a heavy stance, where your swings are slow but full of devastating power that staggers enemies more easily. You can have two of these stances equipped at a time, but outside of their tutorial introductions, I went with dual wielding and blaster for most of my playthrough, with a distinct focus on the former. Each stance handles a bit different, balancing speed, power, and range in various combinations while also offering a unique skill tree. I'd recommend experimenting with each until you find the one that best fits your desired playstyle. From there, you can use your one free skill point reset to funnel all the points you've used already in the other stances into the ones you find most comfortable. But for me, dual wielding was the way to go. But let's not forget about that special Jedi magic, the Force. All the previous Force skills return from Fallen Order, while more have been added on top. I love when sequels don't strip away powers and make you earn them again, but instead build on the old ones by offering new ones. There are ones that you'll use mostly outside of combat, like an air dash, as well as using a Jedi mind trick on unsuspecting NPCs, which is always an in-universe treat. I love doing that. Within combat, you can perform slams and raise enemies up, while also recruiting enemies to fight alongside of you temporarily. Oh, and there's also the ability to slow time for one free hit on each enemy. Of course, throwing my lightsaber still remained a viable tactic that I love doing, and occasionally you'll be joined by a companion, either Marin from the first game or Bode, a mercenary who fights alongside Cal in this game until he doesn't anymore. More on that in a bit. So that's the basic setup of combat. Use your lightsaber to strike, block, and parry using the stance that you like, use the Force for added advantage over your opponents, and use your feet to get the hell out of the way of unblockable moves. It's everything from the first game, except with more options. Along with that comes new enemies to fight, but most won't take you too long to get familiar with. Stick to your parries and overwhelm them with ease. Oh, and there's also a new perk system, but it feels extremely half-baked and forgettable. I only found a handful of them while playing, and even fewer slots to equip them in. I can't be the only one who left these go largely ignored while playing. I'm certain there's many more. It feels like a tacked on afterthought instead of a meaningful addition to character building and playstyle, so the perk system was kind of a wash. And so with that established, let's dip into the three problems I identified with combat, one adjustable and two baked right into the experience. Those being difficulty, fights with multiple opponents, and movement. Fallen Order was not a cakewalk. It often challenged, particularly with its boss fights, but I never felt that here in Survivor despite playing on the same difficulty, that being normal. Perhaps things have been dialed back a bit to emphasize Cal's new status as Jedi Knight instead of Padawan, but that excuse seems flimsy to me. I remember dying to various bosses at least a handful of times in the first game, but here, I only died in 3 boss fights. One with the first boss, a few times to this optional Rancor, and 3 times in the final fight. And one of those deaths was me testing how the game would react to not embracing the dark side. Every other boss fight I beat in one go, even in this brief section where you play a seer and fight against Darth Vader. Even the man with the most midichlorians couldn't stand up to me on normal difficulty, and I'm by no means a god on the sticks. That lack of challenge was a letdown and undercut the supposed power level of some of these villains. This problem extends into fights with regular enemies. Nearly any one-on-one fight was surmountable without breaking a sweat. Animations were often telegraphed for a touch too long, and spamming the parry button often went unpunished. if the onslaught was a bit more aggressive. Circumventing exact timing with clicking the button repeatedly meant I was fine most of the time defensively. I remember the parry window being harsher in Fallen Order's normal difficulty when compared to the one found here, and I don't think that was the right choice considering many players will be returning from the original. It allows you to cakewalk through any solo encounters so long as you don't simply spam the attack button without taking time to implore your defensive options. It allows you to turn your brain off a bit more than you would be able to in the original and in other similar action games. Normal difficulties shouldn't feel like easy mode, but it kinda does here. Luckily, difficulty is adjustable. There's 5 different modes of play, and I think many returning players and regular gamers should consider playing on hard mode if you want to test yourself. These higher difficulties turn down the amount of time you must perform a proper parry while upping the damage you take and aggression of the enemies. You have to fine-tune your fights more, for the betterment of the experience. I went and tested this harder difficulty a bit on Kobo, and well, yeah. I quickly found myself using more stimpaks and could sense that shorter time to counter. It felt good, and almost makes me wish I had played the entire game on hard from the get-go. At least that's what I would say if every single fight in Jedi Survivor was a mano-a-mano encounter. But they aren't. In fact, many will pit you against multiple foes, sometimes in seemingly never-ending waves during the back third of the title. And that's where the baked-in issues begin to make themselves apparent. Encounters will often mix a handful of melee enemies with a few ranged ones hanging out in the back. In these moments, it's easy to feel overwhelmed as 2 or 3 enemies take a crack at you with their electric stick while some stormtroopers chip away health with their blasters. Difficulty isn't necessarily higher here, as you'll often overcome these fights before waltzing into a meditation point where you can reheal. Sure, the enemies will reset, but in the linear levels that don't have much backtracking progression, that won't matter. But the point here is that fighting the multiple enemies isn't as rewarding. You'll take more damage, but this simply taxes your healing heavier while playing on normal. It becomes less about the back and forth duel and more about mitigating damage with heals while you try to take out your foes. It's not nearly as enjoyable as one-on-one bouts, and that's a shame. But this disappointment becomes more of an actual problem when playing on harder difficulties. All of a sudden, that feeling of being overwhelmed sets in. Your limited posture bar breaks upon being attacked from 4 or 5 enemies at once. You take more damage, you die more often, and it's not even that enjoyable style of fight. It's like getting beat down. The posture bar recovers very slowly, but only drains when you block, not parry. But with tighter windows to parry, you're going to miss more and end up blocking by accident. This is especially true of blaster shots you can't see coming, of which there will be a lot. With so many enemies to keep track of, don't be surprised when a few blaster bolts connect, opening up a window to get mega punished. The posture bar will get worn down quickly, and you'll just eat a ton of damage and sometimes die if you get stun locked by the assault. And that sucks, it's not enjoyable. So perhaps normal difficulty is the better way to play. If this series becomes a trilogy, I'd love to see the final game find ways to incorporate more one-on-one challenging fights instead of relying on waves of the same foes to provide artificial difficulty. So overall, is combat improved here versus Fallen Order? Well, I think that's going to depend on the person with the controller in their hands and their desired mode of play. It's certainly going to be easier if you stick to the normal difficulty. Bumping it up will increase the challenge, but it's likely to expose the issues more while forcing you to play more flawlessly and cautiously. I enjoyed my time in combat on the whole, but I wish those boss fights pushed me a little harder, while fights with multiple foes were challenging for the right reasons instead of the wrong ones. Okay, let's talk story. As mentioned at the outset, there will be spoilers throughout this video. In fact, I'm certain I've already shared plenty, probably the most important and impactful one too, but if you don't want to hear about them, you can consider skipping this section. Jedi Survivor takes place after what feels like a few years since the events of Fallen Order. The holocron containing the names and locations of the Force-sensitive children had been destroyed by Cal, Cere, Grease, and Merrin, and from there, the group seems to have disbanded. Apparently, there was a tie-in novel that covered what happened during this time gap, but hell if I read it. Many players won't. So, seeing Cal start the game alone, and then with a new team, immediately adds a layer of mystery to the experience. You expect the masked companions that aid him on Coruscant to reveal themselves as Cere or Merrin, but no, it's a bunch of random people, one of whom is a mercenary named Bode. On Coruscant, Cal outsmarts a member of the Senate and gathers intel for the rebellion. It's clear he spent his time aiding in the fight against the Empire. The mission doesn't go quite as planned when most of his team is killed by the Ninth Sister, a Sith who returns from Fallen Order. After cleaning up that old business, signaling this story won't have many ties to the previous game's villains, Cal and BD-1 escape the planet, but are forced to land on Kobo, where a familiar face awaits them. After meeting up with Grease, Cal learns of an ancient legend centered around a hidden world. This forgotten planet called Tanalorr seems to be off the radar, perhaps a place to hide away from the Empire and maybe even make a safe haven for the rebellion. As Cal investigates this myth, it's made quite clear to the player that he's dealing with a lot of survivor's guilt. He's lost nearly everyone in his life to death. His latest excursion saw most of his team get wiped. Even if we didn't get enough time with them to feel the weight of their deaths, Cal did. And you can see it on his face and hear it in his words. He fears that giving up on his quest to support the rebellion will mean that those who died were lost for nothing. So he pushes on despite the grim odds. It makes sense then that Tanalorr calls out to him. The idea of a safe place outside of the Empire's reach is too alluring to pass up, and so he investigates. He activates an array in the forest, opening the path to Tanalorr, but navigating to it remains impossible without proper guidance. In opening the array, Cal accidentally frees a former Jedi named Dagan. Dagan was Tanalorr's discoverer, and he viewed it in a way similar to Cal. The promise it held was like a drug, consuming him and leading him down a dark path, one in which he turned his back on a friend and the entire Jedi Council as well. He tapped into the dark side, becoming Sith, and seeking revenge against those who he believed had wronged him, while building up Tanalorr as the home of his newfound order of mercenaries. He was stopped, but now you've freed him, and the plan is still on. After exchanging blows, Dagan escapes, and Cal is left on his own to find a way to Tanalorr. Well, not completely alone. He's joined by Bode, a good man who works a dangerous job to ensure the safety of his kid daughter. And Grease is here too. You can feel it. The band's gonna get back together, isn't it? Why, yes. Yes, it is. Traveling to Jedha quickly reunites us with Merrin and eventually Cere. Hell, even Jedi Master Cordova is here. After splitting up the gang, she and Cordova started compiling and rebuilding the Jedi archives so that hope can remain for the Order. The next few hours of the game after this will see Cal searching for MacGuffins. Gotta get the thing so that we can do the thing kinda deal. This takes him to the shattered moon of Kobo, out to the Jedha desert, and more. Many of these sequences though, particularly the one where Cal must rescue a random friend of Cere's out in the desert, feels like padding to the story. It allows the team to weave in more backstory about Dagan and his Jedi companion, Centauri Kree, but not much more. It's all a big search for Tanalorr as Cal begins to hold out hope that it might be a place for him and his to hide away from the Empire. So after a strong opening, this is where the storytelling enters a lull, as the plot kinda meanders along without much action, nor do any of the characters really begin to show signs of change or growth. Some cool set pieces do occasionally break up the monotony, but it doesn't feel like the story is expanding or going much of anywhere during this middle section. I mean, Marin and Cal kiss, so that's something, I guess. But the monotony ends when you engage Dagan for a second fight, where he learns of a compass that will aid his navigation through the asteroid abyss protecting Tanalorr. Cal returns to the Shattered Moon, overwhelms Dagan's right-hand man, Ravis, and learns of the compass's location as well. From there, it's a race. Cal returns to Kobo and ascends its highest point to reach Kree's observatory. Here, Bode and Cal have a final fight against Dagan. Visually, it's an impressive Star Wars fight. Dagan is missing his right arm, yet he can still manipulate the Force from his missing appendage. It provides some spectacle and uniqueness to this character and his style of fighting. I just thought it was a cool touch, but he falls by our hand all the same. Cal uses a Jedi mind trick to temporarily distract Dagan and deals a final blow when he lets his guard down. And with that, we get the compass. Finally, the MacGuffin is ours. End of story, right? All we have to do is head to Tanalorr and be safe for all eternity. It's just that simple. Right? Returning to Jedha, Cal and the team celebrate their victory. They pledge to use Tanalorr as a new headquarters for the Rebellion, a place where they can house the restored Jedi archives, a place to be safe from the Empire, and a place to exist in peace. It's the best of both worlds for Cal. He can continue his efforts against the Empire while keeping those close to him safe after so many have perished. And on top of all that, he's got a girlfriend now. The relationship between him and Marin happens way too quickly though. It feels like a whole lover's arc took place off screen, and now we're seeing a little snippet of it. It just never felt impactful to me. I couldn't connect with their love because it just wasn't built up properly or effectively. It was akin to that cheesy guy gets the girl moment at the end of action films. It's not about the romance, it's about showing him winning in all aspects of life. That's what it feels like here. In that regard though, maybe it does work, because everything is about to come crashing down. As Cordova finishes repairing the compass, a dark secret is revealed. Bode isn't the friend he's presented himself as. He's an Imperial spy. He steals the compass, murders Cordova, and signals the Empire to attack the base. Cal tears after him on a speeder, and after a cliché, unwinnable fight, Bode explains that everything he does for his daughter Kata. Bode was once a Jedi, which explains how he held his own against Dagan. But then, he escapes. Cal is left beaten and broken in the desert, and back at base, things are looking grim. In a surprise sequence, you play as Cere, attempting to defend the work her team has done here. You feel the weight of the Empire's might as waves and waves of soldiers come pouring in. Channeling her best Ewok, Cere even uses weapons such as big rocks to destroy Imperial ships. It's a cool sequence that feels extremely Star Wars, but it pales in comparison to what awaits. Returning to the library, Cere downloads the archives and hands it off to BD-1 like Leia and R2-D2 will do in the future. And then she senses a dark and powerful presence. The camera lingers on her for a moment before cutting to a doorway. We know what's coming. We know who's on the other side. If you've played the prequel, you get this electric jolt of excitement and terror. Enter Darth Vader, arguably the most iconic villain of all time. Amazing. Makes you want to clap right at your TV. The fight is undercut though by the easiness of that normal difficulty, which was a shame, as you never really get to see his power for yourself. Still, the spectacle alone makes for a memorable fight. Cere even appears to win at one point, having Vader on his butt with his back to a wall, and somehow she flubs it. I don't buy it. Maybe force manipulation, but who knows? Vader lives, Cere dies, the archives are destroyed, and it appears that we've lost. Cal returns and the team briefly mourns the loss of Cere. From here, only one path remains: tracking down Bode and getting the compass back to honor the fallen. Cal infiltrates another Imperial base, and after incapacitating its commanding officer, he comes face to face with Kata. The daughter of Bode talks briefly about her upcoming voyage to a place her father tells her they'll be safe. Bode enters and the two discuss Tanalorr and their futures. Cal scorns Bode for turning his back on hundreds of people with his selfish act to keep Tanalorr for himself and his daughter. Bode counters by saying he's not a monster, he's a father, and fathers do what it takes to protect their children, especially after failing to protect the mother. As Bode escapes, Cal is momentarily blinded with rage. His dream of Tanalorr is being ripped away from him, and it leads him to tap into the dark side of the Force for the first time. The extra power it affords is felt in the gameplay as he brutally rips apart stormtroopers and droids alike. And when it's over, it's just him and Merrin. She grounds him, sways him back to the light, and together the two find an alternative path to Tanalorr. Which, not to mention, feels like a total cop-out after we spent the whole game looking for that one specific way to get there, but so be it. After activating the array back on Kobo, Grease, Merrin, BD-1, and Cal set out for Tanalorr. Some fancy flying gets them there, and eventually the lovers come face to face with Bode and Kata. It's made clear that Bode's obsession with this place as an object of safety has consumed him. His mind is so set on starting over here, with just the two of them, that sensation is so strong to him that he ignores and pushes away his daughter when she asks him to do the right thing. And this leads to the inevitable final boss fight between Bode and Cal. There's a lot of cutscenes in this fight, and if you do die, you'll be watching all of them each and every time, which really made it a drag. I don't think there was a skip button, but I could be wrong. I felt this to be a slog, having to watch these scenes over again, especially when Bode gets the upper hand at one point and the game tells you to embrace the darkness. I didn't trigger it, thinking that doing so would actually result in an L, but no, you're forced to send Cal down that route if you want to win the fight. By tapping into that extra power, Cal defeats Bode and grants him one last chance to stand down. But standing down is for chumps. Bode makes a move for Merrin, and Cal puts him down, and then the dust settles. After this, a funeral is held to honor Bode, Cordova, and Cere, and Cal reflects on what comes next for him. He admits he has fear that he won't be strong enough to stop the Empire, but he vows to press on anyway. Clearly, another game will be made to round out this story, and then that's it. That's the recap. Ultimately, I have two criticisms of the narrative: Bode's underexplained motivations and Cal's embracing of the dark side. To be clear, I love Bode's betrayal, or at least the idea of it. I think it's a strong moment in the story, and if it hadn't been spoiled for me, thanks Twitter, it would have really hit hard. Bode seems like such a likable and reliable guy, who's also a strong companion, both in how he helps during combat in the gameplay sequences, but also in saving Cal's life a few times throughout the story. And after coming so close to achieving their supposed shared vision for Tanalorr, it's all ripped away. I like all of that. However, Bode's explanation lacked the emotional resonance that you'd expect. His motivation is his daughter. He steals the compass because he sees it as his ticket out of Imperial duty while also providing a safe place for Kata. But nothing is stopping Bode from having all of that, even if he allows the others to come along. I guess he fears that Cal's plan is to make Tanalorr a Jedi safe haven, which will eventually attract the Empire. But that seems like a stretch. And if that is the reason, the game doesn't say it outright. To me, it seems like they could have coexisted just fine. There was also potential for Bode's line about being a father, not a monster, having more emotional impact, but it really falls flat. I think that's because we don't get to meet Kata or hear much of anything about her outside of real quick conversations, until the scene where Bode explains himself. But before that, we don't meet her, we don't see her, so it's hard to connect with her. Without taking time to build up those characters, this moment is left feeling weak, and there's a few instances of that throughout. They had a great opportunity for a gut punch moment, but they failed to give it the weight it needed to deliver. Next up, Cal embracing the dark side. I think this is a great route to explore for this character, as he tries to balance grief, loss, and guilt within the Jedi teachings. There's clearly an imbalance in Cal's soul, and Bode's betrayal proves to be the tipping point. It's the straw that broke the spammel's back. Not sure I believe that tipping point though. Cal doesn't embrace it until Bode escapes his grasp a second time, but to me, it would have made more sense for it to happen in your first fight with Bode. After feeling like the team had won, Bode's decision ruins everything and gets Cordova killed. Sure, Cal doesn't know about Cere's fate yet, but with everything going on, now seems like the time to tap into the dark side. Not to kill some Imperials after Bode supposedly used him to destroy the base where his daughter was housed. I don't know, it just feels out of order for me. Regardless, resolving Cal's embracing of the dark side is left underexplained here, and while that will make for a cool theme in the final game, it just feels like a loose end for Jedi Survivor. More importantly though, I think it muddles the overall theme. Clearly, this is a game about dealing with survivor's guilt, and how it has potential to consume us if we obsess over our losses. Letting go of that pain can sometimes feel like letting go of the people we've lost. Carrying their memory onward in unhealthy ways can corrupt our minds, especially if their death may have been prevented by us. So we must find ways to embrace their memory without anchoring ourselves in the past. In Survivor, we see this theme play out in two ways, in regards to people the characters have lost, and also the symbolism of Tanalorr as a haven. Dagan viewed Tanalorr as the future for the Jedi Order, but when the Republic didn't share his vision, he snapped and turned against them. He was unable to deal with the loss associated with Tanalorr not reaching the potential that he believed it had. And Bode goes down a similar path. He gets stuck on what Tanalorr could be to him and Kata. That idea of paradise is fueled farther from the guilt he feels over the loss of his wife and the inability to keep her safe. He forsakes others to hold onto that vision, clinging to it so desperately that he loses himself in the process. And Cal mirrors this as well. He views Tanalorr as an escape, a way to get out of the constant threat of the Empire while helping to save the ones he cares about and the Jedi tradition. Tanalorr represents the hopes and dreams of all three of these men, and for two of them, it led them down a path of destruction and ultimately death. Cal is able to remain grounded in the end and comes out victorious against both Dagan and Bode. And then, in her speech to Kata, Merrin explains the importance of letting go of past pains and how there's ways to move forward in life without losing the memory of what was lost. And then the camera pans to Cal, and it just feels like he's the one who broke the cycle and found a way to alleviate his survivor's guilt. That's why he's the hero of the game. He doesn't fall into the pitfalls that Dagan and Bode did. And that's why him embracing his darker side feels like such a strange plot point. It contradicts that hero versus villain dynamic because ultimately, Cal did go down the path of the dark side. He just reined it in enough to overcome the others. He doesn't overcome through good morals and determination and remaining disciplined. No, he does it by dipping into the dark side. So it ends up feeling like the lesson of this game is undercut in an attempt to start pushing a new theme for the next game. And to me, that was a mistake. There was plenty of time to introduce this concept and develop it in a sequel, but doing so here makes this game's story feel left out to dry. That, along with some moments that lacked emotional resonance, made the story less impactful than it could have been. Better than Jedi Fallen Order, but still leaving room for more. Jedi Survivor will leave you scratching your head over its presentation, as it simultaneously presents incredible scenes of familiar Star Wars iconography while also harboring many technical limitations. Let's start with the good. So much of this game feels like it's pulled right out of George Lucas's head. Like seriously, straight out of a Star Wars movie that was never made. And I think that's what really helped me tap into that nostalgic feeling throughout. All the planets felt immediately Star Wars. Obviously, Coruscant is literally from the movies, but exploring my favorite in-universe planet was a real treat. The towering skyscrapers, hovering cars, and the heavy blues and blacks just felt right out of the prequel trilogy. And the ones created here were equally as fascinating, especially the Imperial base on Nova Goron, a giant crystallized asteroid floating around in space. Now that was cool. But big planets aren't enough. You have to take it a step further by delivering those Star Wars structures and the fascinating creatures, both those of lower and higher intelligence. And they did that too. Pylon Saloon embodies it best. After restoring it to its former glory and opening it up to patrons, it feels like the Mos Eisley Cantina, except fully explorable. It's grimy, dirty, dingy, the perfect place for misfits and outcasts of the galaxy to gather. Come on in and be served by a robot bartender, and then grab a seat next to a bounty hunter, before playing a game of holotactics. Hell, just even taking time to just gawk at the character models to see what kind of fascinating beings have been cooked up and interjected into this world was an occurrence for me. I wanted to stop and look. It all just felt Star Wars. Look at it, play it, and you'll agree. Respawn really studied the iconography and found ways to adapt it into their game. The saloon is but just one small example of that. They did it throughout the entire game. The music too is superb. The heavy orchestral tunes also aid in building that Star Wars atmosphere. This was particularly true in lightsaber boss fights, as the brass instruments are matched in ferocity by lightsabers clashing against one another. I wouldn't bat an eye if you told me all of these songs are pulled out of the movies. They just nailed it. Speaking of the movies, we even get a fair amount of those quick fade transitions from the film. Man, such a cool little detail, and I'm glad they incorporated it. So, in their attempts to build an authentic Star Wars playspace, Respawn succeeded. However, it doesn't mean everything is a solid package without any issues. Now, I can't speak to the state of the PC port at launch since I played on PlayStation 5, but even on console, issues were obvious and abundant. The frame rate was the most noticeable, often tanking even while playing on performance mode. It was most abundant on Kobo, which makes sense given that's the biggest play area. It's just something that never feels good, especially when fidelity is already being sacrificed for performance. I also had 2 hard crashes during my play session, one of which did snake away a good 15 minutes of progress. While the game does contain real scenes of beauty, it struggled to output high detailed textures consistently. Perhaps I'm biased by how technically sound Burning Shores was and how great it looked, but still, things here felt like a step back from that. And again, this was mostly true on Kobo, but given you'll spend the most amount of time in-game there, it's a letdown. It's not a deal breaker like the frame rate drops will be for some players though. It's just frustrating when giving up graphical output in exchange for a solid frame rate, and then you don't get that. I also noticed that they did the whole hidden loading screens again, where you shuffle through a tiny crack in the rock while the game unloads the previous section and loads the upcoming one. That one is forgivable, but it certainly does slow your pace of gameplay, especially given how much running, jumping, and swinging you do. There was also a noticeable amount of pop-in, but I didn't have too many issues with screen tearing, which I've seen many outlets report. But all in all, performance mode was a disappointment. If it's not going to deliver a solid 60 frames per second experience, then why even offer this mode of play? At this point, we're 2.5 years into this console generation, and it just feels like every game should be hitting 60 FPS consistently. Maybe I'm far-fetched for thinking that, but 30 FPS nowadays feels like a death sentence. I mean, just look at the reaction to Redfall. So, overall, the presentation feels like you're watching a Star Wars movie with glasses that are slightly off prescription. When things are clear and focused, you can buy into the atmosphere quite well, but it struggles to reach that peak performance throughout the entire experience. Okay, I have done my best to be as harsh as possible on this game, despite really enjoying it. At this point, it's my Game of the Year frontrunner for sure. but I see potential for it to become even better in the final offering of a trilogy. In this way, it sort of reminds me of Horizon Forbidden West last year. Close to greatness, but needing to really batten down the hatches and pull out all the stops to achieve it next time. And I think a third game could do just that. Strong exploration of planets dripping in Star Wars atmosphere was a treat to experience, one that restored my faith in the franchise after it's been dismantled by the recent movies and shows. Combat, despite the issues, is just flashy as hell. A lightsaber remains one of the sickest weapons in the history of sci-fi, and being able to use one in the stances I preferred most was amazing. And for all my complaints on the story, it did hold my attention for the most part. At the very least, they've set up Cal for an interesting inner clash in the next title, and that alone brings me great excitement. I want to see the resolution to that arc. I just wish it wasn't introduced with such a whimper here. And as for the presentation, Respawn, come on, you have to get it right next time. There's a reason I called my review of Fallen Order a glitch in the Force. We need the next game to be technically sound from the get-go. None of that PC port garbage that tanked this game's reputation at launch. Despite the issues, a soft spot remains in my heart for the spin-off franchise. It finds ways to tell very human stories within the mythos. The Jedi archetype has always been an admirable one, and so well captures the struggle of good versus evil, both in how it manifests at the universal level with them standing against the Empire, but also at the internal level. Cal struggles to maintain his composure and not give in to his emotion, but it does tempt him a bit. It's something we've all felt before and can connect to and relate to when our emotions get the best of us. And when you have fun lightsaber combat, Easter eggs to a beloved franchise, and meaningful and rewarded exploration, you have a recipe for a great Star Wars experience. It's certainly one that has restored my faith after nearly a decade of series fatigue. So, in a way, I guess you could say, it's given me a new hope. Thanks for watching. Alright, done! Man, this game was a blast to play. Certainly feels like one of those titles where many players will go after the Platinum Trophy simply because they don't want to put it down. It's just that enjoyable to play moment to moment. I would do that for myself if not wanting to keep up with the latest releases, so for me, it's on to Tears of the Kingdom. If you're excited for the rest of 2023, now is a great time to subscribe to the channel, as more longer-ish videos will be coming out soon. As always, I continue to appreciate your support. It means the world to me. So thank you so much for watching. Please leave a like if you enjoyed the video, consider subscribing for more, follow me on Twitter at NopNapNarp, join our Discord, the link is below, and as always guys, have a nice day, and take care.